Parents, the following program is intended for people over the age of 13. If your kids are younger than that, please use the YouTube Kids app.
Welcome to Scary Stories, the channel that tells you scary stories.
Peter Bernard's Scary Stories for Adults.
Welcome to Scary Stories NYC. I'm your old pal Bigfoot. Well, March is here and we're finally heading towards spring. Our first Dogman story this episode reflects that. But first, I need to point out that today's show is executive produced by Sherman McIntyre. Thanks, Sherman. You've been a supporter for a long time, and we literally wouldn't still be online doing this if it weren't for you. We all genuinely, honestly want to say thanks to you, Mr. McIntyre. If you out there would like to become a Scary Stories executive producer like Sherman McIntyre, just join our affordable paid subscribers club at peterbernard.com. Well, that was a crazy leap year February, at least for us. Who knows what March will blow in? The only thing we can know for sure is March comes in like a dogman. Dear Scary Stories NYC. This story happened way back in the 1980s when I was in my early 20s. I was watching this rich friend of my stepfather's house. It was a really old-fashioned place, and I enjoyed staying in one small corner of the house toward the back. On the ground floor was the old-fashioned kitchen and living room with a big old fireplace in it that I ran 24/7 to heat the place up. I would search outside for firewood to bring home and dry out in the back during the day in order to keep the place warm at night without turning the gas heat on. It was just my thing. I enjoyed the fireplace, and I enjoyed chopping up branches with the homeowner's chainsaw. I remember it was the first or second day of May, and it was gloomy out as soon as I got up that morning. The guy who lived there had a large collection of horror and monster movies on VHS, all recorded with the commercials in them on the cheaper 6-hour mode, so I was in heaven. Sometimes when there was a flash of lightning, it was coming from the television set, and other times it was coming from the brewing storm that was actually out there outside. By the afternoon, I was watching an old black and white 1950s or 60s movie about space aliens landing out in the country. This one had always made me laugh when I watched it in my apartment inside a high-rise building in the city. I hadn't realized how creepy it would be watching this corny old movie when I actually was out in the country where it was set. Teenagers driving down a road accidentally run into a space alien. They try to report the accident, but the aliens sneak over to their car and repair the fender, making it look as though the accident never happened and that the young driver must be insane. This movie didn't seem funny to me anymore. The road that the little aliens were lurking on in the film looked just like one of the roads I had to drive on to get to this house I was watching the movie in. I began to have the creeps, and I kept thinking I was seeing shadows moving out of the corners of my eyes. Lights began flashing outside, but it was not lightning. Something about the coloration and the regularity of their throbbing kind of blinking told me that this was not a manifestation of nature. This was an expression of intelligence. It had to be something man-made. What would be approaching with flashing colored lights? Possibly a police helicopter. I didn't hear the sound of a copter, though. Could the storm's rumblings be drowning it out? I ran outside so I could see the helicopter or whatever it was when it came over the trees in the back. I really wanted to know what this was. Standing out there, I had a more intense feeling of being exposed and vulnerable than I had ever felt before. I also knew that I was being watched. By that I mean, that there were intelligent eyes upon me, and they were viewing me from several angles. I felt certain that the woods were alive with intelligences, and that they were looking at me, studying me. The lights came over the trees as expected, but there was no accompanying helicopter sounds with those lights. The colors weren't blinking on and off, I realized. They were swirling around each other, all within a glowing shape that appeared either round or spherical from my angle. It could have been round like a ball or flatter and more like a disc, but I honestly couldn't be certain. I do know that the swirling colors were mesmerizing and seemed like something I shouldn't have been allowed to see. They were far too beautiful to have been real. They must come from the next world after ours. I don't know how to say it other than that. I don't know if the lights were a machine, a craft, a living organism, or something else entirely. But I do know that the colors moving around inside it were far too beautiful for human eyes to behold. If I had the chance to be lost in them, I would never care about eating or even breathing ever again. I dream of those lights at night, and I yearn for them during my days. I can't imagine anything so pleasurable to see or to consider than the lights I saw on that dark afternoon. After they were gone, I went back inside and unpaused the old sci-fi movie. The Riddler from Batman was in it. How freaky is that? Still, I faced away from the TV screen and sat watching the storm outside. I could still hear the movie and watch a backwards version of the video reflected back at me off of the window I was gazing out of. It became so dark, it might as well have been midnight out there. The rains and winds started freaking out, acting as though they had some kind of personal grudge against the neighborhood. I've honestly never felt that the weather itself was angry before, but that's what it seemed like on that day. The wind almost seemed personified. It was blowing so hard that it sounded like someone whistling, and soon afterward, it started sounding like it was a giant so large it filled the entire sky, moaning deeply and pitifully. The trees were all bending in the same direction as the wind blew so hard, it felt like the house was going to get ripped up and fly away. Then, out in the tree line, I began to be able to see it. I only saw the lights first, the eye shine, I should say. It had incredibly bright eyes, and I could see them long before I could see what they belonged to. When the lightning would flash, I would be able to make out the figure of the creature for a second here and a half second there. It was a man-shaped thing, covered in long, wet hair. It was holding onto a tree trunk for dear life in the violent storm. But all the time, no matter how hard the rain came down or how rough the wind blew, that dog-headed man-like creature kept staring directly at me, right at the window of the house that I was sitting behind. How could I have been so interesting to it, even in such a time of danger and crisis? Shouldn't it have been seeking shelter? It almost felt to me that the creature brought the storm with it. I felt that if that dogman had not brought the storm, then maybe the strange lights did. Or maybe the lights brought the dogman which brought the storm. I'm not talking from my head. I'm talking from my gut. It's just a feeling that I have that these things are all somehow related. It's not something I can prove, since I can't even prove any of this happened other than the storm itself. And there is nothing particularly strange or paranormal about a sudden summer thunderstorm. They're pretty common almost anywhere you go, and they could sometimes be unpredictable, hitting stronger than what anyone could have predicted. I know, deep down, that this storm was different than your average storm. But, once again, it's not something I can prove. It's just something I possess a deep knowing about. I kind of expected the storm to last 15 minutes to a half hour, but by the time it would normally have become nighttime, the water was still beating down, and the winds were still whipping wildly. The windows in the house would rattle every now and then, and I was hoping this wasn't going to turn into anything worse than it had already grown into. I went around inside, seeing if there was anything I could do to reinforce us against the weather, and each time I looked out at the woods, I could see those glowing, golden-colored eyes of the Dogman staring back at me. It didn't matter if I looked out a window on the ground floor or the second floor, the Dogman's eyes were always looking back at mine before I could even look out at them. It was as though it knew where I was at all times. What kind of creature or being was that out there on that rainy day? Why would I be so interesting to it when the weather would seem to make other things higher priorities for it in the moment? What was its relationship to that storm? Did it bring the storm? What did it want or expect from me? The last time I looked out before going to bed, the eyes were still there. In the morning, I awoke to birds chirping and a mild sunny day, but I couldn't see that Dogman out there anywhere. I could see some felled trees in the forest from my second-story vantage point, so I decided to spend the day claiming some of those fallen branches and trunks for firewood. As I marched through the woods that morning with my trusty chainsaw, I kept my eyes out for any paw prints or other proof that the Dogman had actually been out there in the storm. If there had been prints earlier, they must have been washed away by the tail end of the storm, because I saw no proof of anything other than birds and squirrels. But I know what I saw, and what I saw proved to me that March comes in like a Dogman.
You know what time is coming soon, don't you? The day of the wearing of the green skin. I'm inviting you to me St. Patrick's Day Dogman Party. The one and only Dr. Death St. Patrick's Day Scary Story Special. An extra long episode, and only us ghouls and ghosts and deceased individuals are invited. Oh, all right. You seem cool. You can come too. It all happens here on the Scary Stories NYC channel, Tuesday, March 17th. Feel free to arrive early. All my other guests are late.
Dogman is a type of demon, and so are UFOs. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I have had 5 strange experiences in my lifetime. I felt an odd sensation of excitement each time just before something out of the ordinary happened to me. 2 of the events were life-changing synchronicities, too personal to share with you, and the other 3 were experiences of the paranormal or supernatural, at least in my opinion. Because of the similar sensation which preceded all 5 of these events, I have to feel that they are all in some way connected to or similar to each other. I'll tell you about all 3. One time in White Plains, New York in the 1990s, I saw a large triangular-shaped UFO, and it beamed a thin blue light onto me before flying off silently. Another time after that, just outside the baseball field of Stone Hill College in Massachusetts at 3 or 4 in the morning, I experienced tiny, little, elf-like men who all seemed to be trying to speak to me. They seemed more like fairies or gnomes or something than space aliens. Their eyes looked strange and nocturnal, but they weren't grays. Even when I paid close attention to their jabbering, it still made no sense to me. I apologized for not understanding them, and they grew frustrated and angry, then waved me away. I walked back to my room, leaving the small men there on the baseball field. I hoped that they would find someone who got what they were saying. I felt guilty for leaving them in the lurch like that. Of course, the anecdote about my life that you're waiting to hear is the one time I saw a dog-headed being that must have been what many call Dogman. I could tell, though, by the intense eyes lit from within by the flames of hell itself, that this was not just a rare predator unknown to science. This was a manifestation of some kind of ancient and unkillable evil. This dog-headed ape man was somehow demonic. I was visiting Dillard, Georgia, where I had spent much of my youth, visiting my aunt, who wasn't long for this world. My cousin Annie, who was my best friend when I was a kid, took me away one day for a walk up Darnell Creek, which is to the east-southeast of Dillard. If you follow Darnell Creek far enough, you come upon Darnell Falls, which is really nice and sort of magical, at least on days when a gang of drunken teenagers hasn't taken the place over to throw bottles at each other. This afternoon, as it turned out, my cousin and I had the place to ourselves, and we reminisced and skipped rocks and tried to remember all our old jokes and ghost stories until it started to get dark. I had kind of grown up along that creek, and Annie had never known any home but there, so to say we felt comfortable was an understatement. We didn't care that it had become dark and that we were alone in the small woods. We knew we were a short walk back to the human world, and it was so quiet there, we really had no idea that someone else had been watching us the entire time. It jumped over a rock, panting and salivating like a dog, with a dog-like head, dog-like ears, dog-like fangs, and dog-like saliva dripping off its incredibly long dog-like tongue. Contrast that with the body, which, although covered in the same dark black and coarse-looking fur as the head, slouched in an almost human-like pose on the top of the boulder, eventually folding in on itself to sit in a position closer to that of a chimp than a canine. From the angle I was viewing it, the chest up to its ears were mostly in shadow, and the dog did exhibit eye shine, more like a cat would do than you'd expect from a dog. Annie loves animals, and she chuckled at first to see the odd-looking dog that sat like an old man on the bus, sitting there looking at us. As she leaned forward smiling, the dog quickly raised itself to a defensive posture and bore its teeth at us, making a real jungle animal type of sound. I don't know what it would be called, and I never heard a sound like that coming from a dog before or since. All I know is I saw its fur standing on end, and I knew it wasn't bluffing. Annie pulled back, and we both sat there still as the dog threw a major temper tantrum. It was terrifying. I didn't know what he was going to do to us that evening. We had no choice but to sit there and take it as the dog thing barked in our faces and snapped at our throats and fingers, even standing up on its hind legs to double its height and roar at us. It was stamping back and forth, left and right, as though it was lecturing us about how badly we had messed up. I really had no idea where this was going to go until the Dogman turned to face away from us, and he kicked dirt on top of us. We just stood there and let this dog-headed monster thing kick dirt all over us. And then it seemed to be ready for the next thing on its agenda, and it just sort of trotted away through the bushes. It was over as fast as it had started. On our walk back to her place, I quizzed Annie if she had heard of any other stories of dogs that stood up and lectured you, but she said she had never heard of anything like that even in other places. In my opinion, all of these things, the Dogman, the UFOs, The strange little men, all of them are related to the demon realm, the afterlife, the etheric, the dream time. These are the monsters that invade your dreams and turn them into nightmares. These are the haunted things that possess you if you allow them to enter. These are the things that kidnap you in the dark of night. If I had understood the little people, I likely wouldn't be here now to tell you this story. And yet, I felt guilty for not allowing them to trap me somehow. Even though we find stories about such things as I've described to be interesting, I can tell you from personal experience that they are not always very pleasant stories to have to live through. If you see little men standing where they shouldn't be, beckoning you over, run away. If you don't feel fear at the sight of them, that alone should make you afraid. If you value your mortal existence, if you enjoy being who you are, then steer clear of things like the Dogman and the fairies and the strange lights and shapes that blink at you from the sky in the night. It's not so much that they're all evil. It's more that they're from the demonic realm, and the demonic realm can be bad for the health of ordinary citizens. Unless you want to actually become Rip Van Winkle, then be careful about taking naps too close to the fairy ring. The reason I'm telling you all this is because Dogman is a type of demon, and so are UFOs. The White Mountain Werewolf. Dear Scary Stories NYC, I live in a part of Pennsylvania that I think must have accidentally fallen down from heaven. Farms and country, nice people and laid-back atmosphere. We're civilized enough but surrounded by various large protected natural areas. There's Bald Eagle State Forest, Poe Valley State Park, Poe Patty State Park, and the one my house was just a short ways down from, the White Mountain Wild Area. There's also Little Mountain to the north, Roth Rock Forest to the south, and underneath it all, at least in my opinion, is the cave system, which you can find one entrance to at Woodward Cave, not far from where I was. I should say that's not official or accepted by anyone except me, the idea that there's a vast cave system underneath the entire area. It's just how I feel, and I have my reasons for it after decades of living, hiking, camping, and hunting in the area all around there. Sometimes I would put my ear to the ground and I would hear sounds that echoed deep under there, as though someone had machinery running in a large cave or interior room. I don't know if it's a breakaway civilization or the Deros and the Teros or the US government, but those are remote locations, so if some extremely powerful monolithic entity wanted to set up a huge base camp underground and have almost nobody notice, that entire area would have probably been a good place to scout out. My story starts when I was having a dream about a large dog chasing me. It was barking, and I was running away, but no matter how fast I ran, it was always able to keep up. Eventually, I woke up, realizing it was after 3 a.m. and the barking I was hearing was coming from my neighbor's dog who slept outside at night. He would bark at nocturnal creatures who dared to enter his backyard, but they would usually scoot away fast, and he had never barked so long as to wake me from a deep sleep before. As I lay there in bed listening, the dog's snarling growl grew more desperate sounding than before, and I heard genuine fear in that animal's voice. My interest had been piqued, and so I started rousing myself and getting untangled from my bed covers. The sounds outside only sounded more upsetting with each passing moment, and just before I was able to look outside, I heard the most horrible sound I'd ever heard a dog make, and I wasn't certain, but I thought I also heard a simultaneous, deeper kind of animal sound. By the time I reached the window, it had gone silent out there, and I couldn't see the dog from the angle of my second-story bedroom window at all. What I did see surprised me so much that in my half-awake state, I momentarily lost my center of gravity, and I almost fell over backward. What I saw doesn't sound all that incredible at first. A dog jumped over the neighbor's fence into my yard. The thing is, it was not your ordinary kind of dog. I would say that at first I thought I was looking at a Doberman, but the largest, longest, and widest Doberman that there had ever been. In the next instant, though, I could see that the dog had not leaped the fence in the way a canine would normally do such a thing. Even before I saw it land on one hind foot, then the other, I could see that this creature or person or entity had just leaped the fence the way a human runner would clear a small hurdle. This fence was not a small hurdle, though. It's taller than I am. It has to be 7 feet tall or higher. The animal's front arms never dropped to the ground as I expected them to either. Instead, they pumped back and forth at either side of the torso, appearing to be structured much closer to human arms than dogs' front legs. The giant man dog ran bipedally about 3 steps across our yard and over the next fence into the yard of our neighbor to the left. I would imagine he kept going until he was back in the woods, which are connected to the White Mountain Wild area. In my mind, I dubbed him the White Mountain Werewolf. I don't really think he was a shape-shifting werewolf, but I just thought the name sounded nicer than the White Mountain Dogman. Since the night this all happened, my little slice of heaven in Pennsylvania has become a bit of a nightmare. The neighbor asked me if I saw what did this terrible thing to his poor dog, and I hesitated before answering. I hadn't expected him to look me in the eye and ask me that directly. I wanted to tell him the truth, but I thought he might think I was crazy if I told him that a Doberman who walked like a man was what did away with his beloved family pet. So I hesitated. Then I told him no, I hadn't seen anything. Some of the other neighbors were there at the same time too, and apparently they all wondered about my hesitation. They decided I seemed guilty, and they wondered if I had something to do with what happened, or if maybe I was protecting the culprit. Now, none of that was logical. I couldn't be responsible for an animal attack. The only animals I had in my house were goldfish. So now the people I lived near all treated me as though I were a bad person that attacks nice dogs at 3 a.m. for no reason. Still to this day, I kind of have half a mind to tell them all the truth, that it was a Dogman that did the deed. But it wouldn't change their minds anyway. When someone has decided to think ill of you, nothing is likely to dissuade them. But at least I've been able to get it off my chest by telling you all about the White Mountain Werewolf. Hey, it's me, Henry Lee Dogman, here to thank those of you who support all of us here at Scary Stories NYC. It really helps us if you click like, and if you forward our videos or leave cool comments. If you can, it helps us even more when you let us share our 25 episode and growing collection of uncensored, scary Dogman stories with you by becoming a paid subscriber at peterbernard.com. That's right, join our monthly club and get 25 stories right off the bat, each of them wilder than what we're allowed to tell you on this channel. Then, each Sunday, get another new scary story, usually a Dogman story, but always uncensored and secret, available nowhere else on the planet. Please consider joining us today at peterbernard.com and keep the scary stories coming. Thanks, everyone.
If you enjoyed this, please click like or consider subscribing. Remember to click the bell icon or you won't get notifications. If you want to listen to Bigfoot's secret uncensored story each Sunday, just go to peterbernard.com and become a paid subscriber. See you tomorrow. Same dog time, same dog channel.
come back for more scary stories.